What if I told you that Jesus made predictions so specific, naming places, people, methods, and timing, that secular historians still can't fully explain them away? Not vague spiritual metaphors, not open-ended symbolism you can bend to fit anything. Hard, verifiable, documented fulfillments that line up with the historical record in ways that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is going to reshape the way you read both the Gospels and the headlines. Here's what most people miss when they think about prophecy. There's a world of difference between someone throwing out predictions so fuzzy they could apply to literally any situation. Think horoscopes, think fortune cookies, and someone who locks in on exact details. Specific people, specific places, specific methods, specific timing. Jesus did both. And here's what makes that so significant. The historical record, not just biblical, but secular, confirms that what he said came true. Not roughly, not allegorically in a way that requires imaginative stretching. It happened exactly the way he described it, in the time frame he laid out. That's what we're walking through today. Each prophecy, each fulfillment, and the weight that carries for anyone willing to take it seriously. Let's start with something that might seem simple on the surface, but is actually one of the boldest claims any human being has ever made. At a certain point, Jesus looked at his disciples and told them plainly, heaven and earth would pass away, but his words never would. Sit with that for a second. The Roman Empire gone, the Assyrian Empire dust. Languages that once dominated entire civilizations are now dead, studied only in university linguistics departments. Cultures that seemed permanent have been buried under sand and centuries. And yet the words of a carpenter from a backwater corner of first century Galilee are still being read, studied, preached, debated, and translated into hundreds of languages by billions of people on every single continent, right now, today. That prophecy doesn't need a defense. It defends itself every time someone opens a Bible anywhere in the world. But Jesus didn't stop there. On another occasion, he was at the home of Simon the leper when a woman named Mary of Bethany walked in with an alabaster jar of incredibly expensive perfume and poured it over him. The disciples were annoyed. They called it wasteful. And Jesus responded with something that must have seemed completely out of place in that moment. He said that wherever the gospel would be preached throughout the entire world, what this woman had done would be told in memory of her. Think about the audacity of that statement. In that single moment, Jesus was asserting that the message he carried would reach every corner of the earth, and it did. And that this one specific act, performed by a woman most people had never heard of, would be retold everywhere that message went. And it has been. You are hearing about it right now, on the other side of the planet from where it happened 2,000 years later. Every time someone tells that story, the prophecy fulfills itself again. Now, if those two prophecies alone were enough to make us slow down and think hard, what comes next tightens the precision in a way that leaves very little room for the word coincidence. At the Last Supper, while the disciples were still at the table, Jesus dropped something that hit the room like a cold wave. One of them was going to betray him. The silence that followed was broken by each man looking inward and asking if it could possibly be him. Jesus already knew. Judas Iscariot left that table, led soldiers and religious leaders to where Jesus was praying, and identified him with a kiss. A gesture that in any other context communicates love and loyalty was weaponized as the signal for arrest. The prophecy didn't just come true. It came true with a kind of painful irony that only deepens the gravity of the moment. And it wasn't only Judas. That same night, Jesus went further. He told them that every single disciple would abandon him. Not some of them, not the less committed ones. All of them. He even quoted the prophet Zechariah, "Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter." The disciples pushed back hard. Peter, especially with that signature intensity of his, swore up and down that even if everyone else walked away, he never would. And Jesus responded with a specificity that still unsettles people when they read it carefully. Before the rooster crowed that very night, Peter would deny knowing him 3 times. Peter was offended. But when the guards dragged Jesus away for questioning, every disciple disappeared. Peter, the one who had promised to die alongside his master, stood outside in the cold, trying to blend into the crowd. 3 different people recognized him as a follower of Jesus. 3 times he denied it. The 3rd time, the rooster crowed, and Peter walked away weeping so hard the text says it was bitter. That scene doesn't have the feel of something reconstructed after the fact to look prophetic. It has the raw, uncomfortable texture of a prediction nobody wanted to be true. What makes this whole sequence even more striking is the level of awareness Jesus demonstrated about his own trajectory. This wasn't a gut feeling. It wasn't fatalism. It was clear, detailed, advanced knowledge communicated without hesitation. Jesus told his disciples directly that he was going to Jerusalem, that he would suffer at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and that he would be killed. He named the city. He named the actors. He named the outcome. And every single detail landed exactly as he described. The very religious leaders he had identified were the ones who orchestrated his arrest, his irregular trial, and his handoff to the Roman authorities. The soldiers beat him, blindfolded him, mocked him, and dared him to prophesy who had hit him. The cruelty wasn't random. It followed the script Jesus himself had already laid out. But the prophecy that stops attentive readers cold is the one about crucifixion. Jesus didn't simply say he was going to die. He specified the method. He said the Son of Man would be handed over to be crucified. And here's why that detail matters so much. Crucifixion was a Roman method of execution, not a Jewish one. Jewish law prescribed stoning. Romans crucified. When Jesus said what he said, he wasn't just predicting his death. He was predicting Roman jurisdiction, the kind of legal process that would strip him of any Jewish court protection, and the precise physical manner in which he would be executed. And he added the timing. This would happen during Passover. John records with precision that it was the day of preparation for Passover when Pilate handed him over. The convergence of detail, method, timing, location, the specific parties involved, doesn't leave a comfortable exit ramp for anyone wanting to write it off as coincidence. Then came the most staggering prophecy of all, made after his death. Jesus had said he would rebuild the temple in 3 days. The crowd that heard him assumed he meant the physical temple in Jerusalem, the one that had taken decades to construct. But John clarifies that he was talking about the temple of his own body. 3 days after burial, Jesus rose. The disciples remembered the statement and understood it for the first time. The priests and Pharisees had also remembered it. They went to Pilate after the crucifixion asking for the tomb to be secured, citing that deceiver had claimed he would rise on the 3rd day. They feared the prophecy even after his death. And when the women arrived at the tomb Sunday morning, they found it empty and heard words that echo through history. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. From that point forward, Jesus had promised that the Father would send the Holy Spirit in his name, a comforter who would teach everything and remind the disciples of all he had told them. 50 days after Passover, on the day of Pentecost, the disciples were gathered when something happened that none of them had anticipated in that form. A sound like a violent, rushing wind filled the space. Tongues of fire rested on each of them, and they all began speaking in languages they'd never learned. Peter, the same man who weeks earlier had denied Jesus 3 times out of fear, stood up and preached to thousands with a boldness that had no natural explanation. The transformation was total. The Spirit Jesus had promised arrived exactly as he had described it. But Jesus didn't only prophesy about his own path. He looked outward, toward the future of Jerusalem and the Jewish people. And what he saw and said was so precise that secular scholars are still wrestling with how to account for it. He wept over Jerusalem and declared that days were coming when enemies would surround the city, tear it down completely, and leave not one stone standing on another. He connected this to the city's failure to recognize the moment of God's visitation. 40 years later, in 70 AD, the Roman general Titus besieged Jerusalem. The destruction was total and savage. The temple, the defining glory of Israel, was burned and leveled. The stones were physically pried apart in the search for gold that had melted into the cracks during the fire. Jesus had described that scene decades before it happened with a level of specificity that no political analysis of the time could have produced. And about the Jewish people themselves, Jesus also spoke directly. He said they would fall by the sword, be taken captive to every nation. He said days were coming so terrible that mothers would weep over their children. What followed the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD is one of the most painful chapters in human history. Centuries of dispersion, persecution, exile, and suffering that anyone with even passing historical awareness understands. Jesus named it all before a single stone had fallen. And that brings us to the only question that matters after everything we've just walked through. What do you do with it? It's not really possible to sit with this body of prophecy. The specificity, the breadth, the consistency between what was said and what happened, and treat it as historically interesting trivia without personal consequence. The precision is too tight. The scope is too wide. The record is too consistent to be written off as coincidence or late fabrication. Jesus spoke. What he said happened. In his own life, in the lives of those around him, and in the history of entire nations across centuries. If any part of what you heard today hit different, if you felt that inner pull that shows up when you come across something bigger than you were expecting, don't let this moment just scroll past. Share this video with someone in your life who is full of questions about faith, about history, about whether the Bible has anything real to say to the world we live in now. Send it to that friend who always says they need actual evidence before they believed anything. And if you want to keep going deeper, unpacking every prophecy, exploring every layer, understanding Scripture in a way that's going to consistently surprise you, then subscribe to Living Hope right now and hit the bell. Because the people who are here aren't just watching videos. They're building a faith that holds when everything around them shakes. And this is only the beginning.